Welcome back. It is another week, and I am so excited. This week we have with us Lindsay Bryan-Podvin. She, her, is a biracial financial wellness expert, speaker, and author of the book, The Financial Anxiety Solution. A practicing social worker since 2012, she uses a shame-free approach to help people get their minds and money in balance by focusing on the intersection of money and mental health using financial therapy. While financial literacy is important, she champions the belief that money is rooted in emotions and impacted by the systems around us. She has a degree in sociology and a master's in social work with certificates in financial social work and financial therapy. She lives with her partner and their dog on the occupied land of Fox, Peoria, and Potawatomi peoples, also known as Michigan. And it is my pleasure to welcome Lindsay.
Yeah. Hey, Meg.
Potawatomi.
I'm so happy to be here.
Potawatomi. We just talked about
Potawatomi.
this, and I
Okay.
watched it.
That's
If you
okay.
tell
That's
us
okay. It's better to say it and be like, hey, I made a mistake and try again.
Yep.
It's all good.
Well, that's how we learn. That's how we
Yes, it
learn.
is. It
Yes.
is indeed.
What a delight. What a treat. Thank you so much for allowing me to sneak into your DMs, and thank you for saying yes to joining me because this is a conversation I have so much with new parents.
Mm.
Money, stress, daycare, diapers, and I just feel like we can all do the Pythagorean theorem maybe, but we don't know how to balance a checkbook or the things that we need to do to make sure that we feel comfortable. And so I'm really grateful for you taking the time to come join me today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have this conversation. Like you said, it's something that we all interact with. We all earn money, spend money, loan it, lose it. We all have a relationship with money, and particularly for people who are expanding their family by bringing children into the world, like we gotta talk numbers. And I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. Yes, absolutely. So tell me, first, how did you get into sociology, into social work? What kind of drew you to that area?
Such a good question. I didn't really know what I wanted to do.
Love it.
And
Yes.
sociology was just the topic that lit me up the most in school. And so, being young and naive, I was like, I'm going to become a PhD sociologist. I'm going to do research. I'm going to teach. I'm going to be a professor. And then, life happens and I'm like, oh, I'm not doing 7 more years of school. Like,
Yes.
absolutely not. And so social work really spoke to me because it was a shorter track to getting your foot in the door and having a career. And what I particularly loved about it is that I changed my mind a lot. So I always knew I wanted to be in the mental health space, but I didn't know exactly how I wanted to do it. I didn't know if I wanted to do research, as I mentioned earlier, or if I wanted to do clinical work. And what I loved about social work was the diversity that it brought to our roles, right? You can work in a school, you can work in a hospital, you can work for yourself. And I just loved that there was one kind of track that I could take that could open so many doors. So that is why I chose social work.
Mhm. Oh, that's so wonderful. I love that. I know you're right. So sociology too, I assume that's kind of a required course, kind of 100, 101 for a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
programs. So then finding that that's interesting and kind of going on from there, that's wonderful. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so tell me how then with that information, then you decided to foray into the financial sphere.
Yeah, well, that was a longer, more windy road.
Yeah.
So, like many social workers, I got my first job in a nonprofit doing work that felt very meaningful and also very hard. I was doing refugee resettlement work. So, I was helping people with acculturation, getting them used to working in the US, navigating all the systems, and I was also earning less money than I did when I was a waitress.
Yes.
And really quickly, I realized, oh shoot, I've got to get my numbers in order. And I did what a lot of us are told to do. So I went to the library, I checked out a bunch of books on personal finance, and they were all telling me, cut your spending, have a budget, do this, do that, do the other thing. So I was doing all of those things, Meg. I cut my spending down to bare bones. I was not doing any sort of like frivolous spending or any entertainment. I was doing all the things that I thought I was supposed to be doing, and yet I was still really struggling to make ends
Mhm.
meet. And
Yes.
not only were like my finances hurting, but physically, mentally, I was
Yeah.
being impacted. I have had depression and anxiety pretty much as soon as I hit puberty,
Yeah.
and both of those diagnoses were really well managed. And then all of a sudden, they flared right back up. My anxiety and depression all of a sudden was a nightmare again. I developed chronic insomnia. I was sleeping 2 to 4 hours a night. And as you can imagine, when you're not sleeping, it exacerbates anxiety, it exacerbates depression. And it also meant that I was really susceptible to colds and flus. So I was getting sick all the time.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was this money piece that was literally making me sick. I was struggling to make ends meet. I was doing everything that I could, but I didn't have the capacity to do the things these personal finance people were telling me. I didn't have the capacity to side hustle. I was exhausted. I was sick. I couldn't go back to serving on the weekends. My body was like literally shutting down. And so I felt like such a failure and I felt so embarrassed, right? Here I was, I did all the things I thought I was supposed to do. I got a degree, I got a master's degree, I finished an internship, and I was really, really struggling and I felt immense money shame about it. And so about a year and a half into that job, for my performance review, I did all the things again you're supposed to do. I had my little practice ready of how I was going to negotiate and get my pay raise. I had outlined all of the responsibilities I did. I had all my metrics ready to go. And I went into that meeting feeling super confident that I'd get some sort of raise. And I was met with, nope, Lindsay, you're not getting a raise. And not only are you not getting a raise, you should really be thankful to have a job in this economy.
Wow.
And exactly what your face
Oh my gosh,
did,
my face.
my body did, right? I could feel this like boom, this pit in my stomach.
Yes.
I felt so heavy. I felt so sad. I felt so discouraged. And so I like walked back to my office and I knew from the walk from my supervisor's office to my office that I was like, I can't keep doing this. And so right then I started searching for other opportunities. And I thankfully was able to get a better paying job. And within months of getting that new higher paycheck, all of a sudden my anxiety and depression started to normalize again. My sleep started to come back. My body started to literally repair itself. And it was this moment of, you can follow all of the budgeting, all the saving tips in the world, but at the end of the day, if you're not earning enough, no amount of financial literacy is going to move the needle. And that kind of became this personal, internal kind of whisper network of me to my other social work friends of like, look, these nonprofits are doing great work, but if they can't afford to pay you, you gotta go somewhere else. You have to take care of yourself. We have to practice financial self-care. So kind of quietly, I was like telling all my friends this. And then in my new role, I was doing a lot of anxiety and depression counseling. And as you can imagine, a lot of people with depression and anxiety also have money struggles, but what are we taught? Yeah, imagine that. But as social workers, we're not taught to talk about money, right? You and I probably had classes on sex and trauma and abuse and like really hard things.
Yes.
But I didn't have any training on money.
Not at all.
Not at all. Exactly. So when somebody came in with depression and anxiety and they were also stressed about their finances, my training equipped me to help them find like an 800 number, right? Here's somebody who can help you make sure that your electricity doesn't get shut off. Here's a nonprofit that can help you make sure that you can get high-speed internet at a discount. But nobody actually taught me how to talk to my clients about money. And so here I had this personal lived experience of the importance of earning enough. And then I have this professional experience of like, we're missing something here.
Yes.
We're absolutely missing something here. If a client can come in and talk to us about depression and anxiety and all of their other pain points, why am I telling them, sorry, you can't talk to me about money? It just felt like a huge mismatch. So at that point in time, I started turning to the internet and being like, how can I help my clients with money while staying within my scope of practice? I don't want to be a financial advisor. I don't want to be a personal planner. Like, I want to stay in my field, but I also want to bring some of this knowledge and wisdom to my clients. So that's how I found financial therapy and financial social work. And then I went in to get certifications in those things. And then fast forward to 2020, I opened up my own practice and I've been full with a wait list for almost 2 years now. So
wow.
There is a need. People are hungry to talk about money, and they're hungry to talk about it in a way that isn't just about budgeting and saving and spreadsheets, right? They want to talk about the emotional side.
Yes. Yes, because it is, I mean, there is a very mathematical piece of it, of course. There's a very, um, rational mind side to it, certainly, but the it's fascinating how much money is the cause of stressors interpersonally,
Yeah.
individually, in relationships, a lot of that. So it's fascinating to see how we just that's not important, I guess, in the social work education and a number. It's not, I'm not want to bash social work because
Yeah.
I teach at KU, but I
Yeah.
love social work, but it's just not something I guess clinically that we look at. So it's great to see. I actually, before I started following you, I don't think I realized that there was like a financial social work certification in existence. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and you're not wrong. Like, thankfully, I got my certificate 2018, so several years ago now. But
yeah,
thankfully, there are more social work programs that are offering courses on financial capability, on financial social work. So whether you get certified or not, at least more and more schools are realizing how imperative it is that as social workers, we have training on the emotional and practical side of money will be just for any field that we decide to go into and narrow in on, money's going to come up. So
yes.
thankfully the field is getting better at actually providing that education.
Absolutely. And it will definitely be something that I discuss with my students as well of like, I can't teach you how to get the certificate, but keep it in mind, it does exist. And you will be having these conversations, whether you choose to get certified or not. So make sure that you feel
Exactly.
able to have an intelligible conversation for sure.
Absolutely.
Um, and so I know you wrote the book on it, The Financial Anxiety
Yeah,
Solution.
right
There
there.
it is. Love it. Tell me kind of what that process was like. What stirred you to say, I got to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, I assume. Um,
Yeah.
what did that look like for you?
Wow. Well, I am incredibly fortunate in that a small publishing house actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about writing a book on financial anxiety?"
Amazing.
So I did not come up with the idea to write a
Yeah.
book, but after having conversations with them, it was this really good time in my career and in my life where it was kind of leaning on that edge of imposter syndrome of like, can I do this? Do I have the
Uh-huh.
skills? Do I know how to do it? And what I find with imposter syndrome is the thing that we each experience imposter syndrome on. A
Yes.
way for me to kind of dispel my own imposter syndrome is to
Yes.
talk about it, right?
Yes.
So when they came to me and said, "Hey, we would love to kind of just start having a conversation about you writing this book," I brought it up with my colleagues and I said to them, "Do you think of me as like a go-to person on financial anxiety or money worries?" And like unequivocally they were like, "Lindsay, think about all like the side conversations we've had about money, or how I come to you for like, on the fly supervision when my clients are talking about money." And I just had this realization that I know more than I'm giving myself credit for.
Yes.
And that helped me to overcome the imposter syndrome. In terms of the process, because I had a publisher and because I had an editor, they were fantastic in helping me to kind of create some scaffolding around what that would look like. I had a deadline too, which also helps, right? If you have a
Yes.
deadline, we have a way of figuring things out.
Little
Uh,
external motivation there. Yeah.
little external motivation, but it was also this challenge of
Yeah.
I started to try and write it like in between clients, which as you can imagine did not
Sure.
work.
No.
So I realized I actually have to shift my clients. At that point in time I was seeing clients 5 days a week,
Yeah.
and so I got rid of seeing clients on Mondays, and Mondays became my writing day.
Yes.
And that made a big difference. So I started with the end in mind. So I started with a table of contents, and then each week I would try and kind of fill a chapter. And the cool thing is that it's a workbook. It's highly interactive.
Yes.
So I thought through, what are the exercises I take my clients through? What are the questions that come up in my clinical work? How can I address that in kind of a step-by-step format? And so that was the process of going through creating and writing the book.
Amazing. That's so great too. And yeah, what an interesting space. I talk about imposter syndrome a lot with clients, with supervisees, with my students, with myself. But
Yeah.
it's so even in the moment when a publisher sought you out and you're still like, oh no, I think you've got the wrong person.
Right, right. It doesn't matter. It comes up every time we get more experience and expertise, and as we become known as a professor, then you're gonna start having imposter syndrome of like, am I a professor? Am I qualified to
Oh,
be here amongst these peers? And then,
yes.
over time, you get more comfy with it.
I literally did an episode that week on my imposter syndrome because at the time the class in the spring I was teaching was on a Thursday and it was a Monday and I was like I was physically consumed with the imposter syndrome and I was like I need to talk about this because otherwise it is going to eat me away. I'm going to get sick. Something is going to happen because I can't just sit with this. So
Mm.
it's amazing how we all it seems to be pretty pervasive, this imposter syndrome, that we all don't just trust ourselves to do the things that we know that we're capable of doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's so great that it's a workbook. I find it's really interesting. So I work a lot in the perinatal space, of course, and I find each client needing something very different. And sometimes we just need to sit in the space and be held. And then sometimes I have clients who really like to do. They like to have something tangible, an activity, an app they can download, something that they can feel like they're doing. And with financial, of course, it's not just be more mindful of what you spend. They're actually having that activity and something in place that can feel understandable and doable and manageable is very important. So it's really great that they have having the access to the financial anxiety solution there. And so speaking of kind of bringing it into the perinatal space, I'm curious what, a lot of parents that listen to my show. Also, if you don't mind just a second, for those of you who are new to the show, this is not my normal voice. I've had really bad allergies when I was in Mexico earlier this week, and I hope to have my voice back for next week. But and those of you who do know, they're like, "What's wrong with Meg?" I'm fine, just a little allergies, lots of sneezing when I was at my friend's wedding. So anyway, so bringing it back, thank you for the moment. So with the parenting piece, how do we kind of talk to our children about money? Because if I may give an anecdote of myself, I remember sitting because my undergrad's in business. And I remember sitting in there like, you need to make sure that you start a 401k because compounding interest and math and do all these things. And it was very important. And I feel like even sooner can we start to have these conversations. What's a good and healthy and understandable way of kind of broaching the conversation with our children? And like at what age? What does that look like?
Love this question.
Mm.
And the answer is that it's never too early to talk about money, which sounds wild. But what financial psychology and financial behaviorists have found is that by the age of 8, most of us already have an idea of what we think money is or isn't, or what we're allowed to do or not do. So,
Hey,
which makes perfect sense. Like if you think
yeah,
about child development, they're doing a lot of brain growth between the ages of 0 and 7, 0 and 8,
true.
right? And
Yes,
they
true.
consume, they pick up on what's going on financially, not
Yeah.
just based on words, but based on how things feel, right? So if it feels tense in the house when we're getting ready to go grocery shopping, or if it feels exciting right before a vacation, kids pick up on that stuff. And
Mhm.
kids also don't have the same filters and embarrassment that us adults have, right? So
Truly.
it's
Mhm.
very common for a young kid as they're learning about like kindergarten, first grade career day to come home and be like, Dad, how much money do you make? Abuela, how much money do you make? Right? And
Yeah.
a quick answer that a lot of us do is like, shh, we don't talk about that. That's rude. It's impolite,
Uh-huh.
right? So one of the first things kids hear is like, ooh, don't talk about money. That's bad. That's
Uh-huh.
wrong. But what I invite parents to do, rather than have like a ready to go script of what they need to talk about money wise with kids at what age, is to just do what they already do with a lot of other hard topics, right? Kids are going to ask about sex, they're going to ask about drinking, they're going to ask about other types of topics that we might be like, "Oh, it's a little sensitive."
Sure.
But instead of being like, "No, we don't talk about that in this house," we think for a second like, how old is this child? What are they really asking me? How can I answer this question in a way that is developmentally appropriate, that doesn't shame them, and that holds space for us to have open communications, right? So if a kid asks when you're grocery shopping, Mom, how much money do you make? Are we poor? Which are questions kids ask, right?
Of course.
And they're going, shh, don't talk about it. you could say like, we're in a public space. You could say, you know what, I would love to answer that question when we get in the car. It's kind of a private conversation, but I'm so glad you asked me, right?
Yeah.
And then you're modeling for them, oh, okay, this is a little sensitive, and it's something that, my parents or my caregivers are willing to talk to me about. And then when you get in the car, you can ask those little open-ended questions to figure out what the heck that kid wanted anyway. They probably don't want to know what your salary is and whether or not you have a 401k match,
Yes.
right? They
Right.
probably want to know, are we safe? Do mom and dad, or do our parents or our caregivers or whomever's taking care of me, do they earn enough to, are we okay?
Yes.
They might be asking those questions, so you can answer those questions. And then, of course, as your kids get older, then you can have more nuanced conversations as they get to be, 14, 15, and they're thinking about working, talking about minimum wage and talking about how taxes get taken out, right?
Yeah.
All of these conversations will
Yes.
eventually happen, but
Mhm.
think about the developmental stage your child's at before jumping into, an answer that a 4-year-old wants is vastly different than the answer a 17-year-old wants.
Certainly, certainly. Amazing. Yeah, that's such a good point too, of recognizing, if your 7-year-old is at the grocery store and asks a question, it's perhaps because they recognize the tension that comes each week or each however often you go, and
Yeah.
whether or not words are said, just even being able to visually observe. And then that safety piece, right? Are we safe? Not tell me about your 401k matching and discuss compounding interest with me because I'm acutely interested in it, but
Right, right.
am I going to be able to eat next week, or is
Yeah.
someone going to take our house or whatever that might be? And so
Right, right.
that's, yeah, and I really love how you describe kind of the openness of parenting. When we present shame around we instill that, certainly children are able to develop their own senses of shame and guilt and embarrassment and humiliation, but we certainly as parents can inflict that upon them by
Mm-hmm.
making a conversation shameful and bringing it around there. So being mindful of that is so important. I appreciate you sharing that. It
Yeah.
might not be something we think about, because while there can be, like, we don't share our gross net worth, our gross income, our net worth at brunch.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't, there's a difference between being shameful and, like, perhaps people might feel like that's tacky or something, like, so being
Yeah.
able to, right, like, it's okay that we don't just shout numbers out across the grocery store, but also making sure that it is important that we are discussing, and that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit kind of what your experience has been in working, have you had any experience working with people who are going through fertility struggles? Obviously, it's a very expensive adoption. Certainly when a baby joins the family, when the family expands, what do those conversations look like?
Oh, well, what I often find is that those conversations aren't happening often enough. And so the
Yes.
tension builds up. And
Mhm.
then we are being really reactive about finances rather than proactive. And it's nobody's fault. Most of us are not taught to talk about money. And so you've
Right.
got two people in a relationship, and then you've got the expenses of fertility or adoption, or just giving birth in this country is expensive, right?
Truly. I'm still
For the
paying off my daughter.
I know, it's costly.
Yeah.
So I invite people to take a step back. And if you're hearing this right now and you already have kids, it's not too late to be having conversations with your partner about finances. But if you're at a stage where you're thinking about fertility treatment, you're thinking about trying to get pregnant, you're thinking about filling out an application to get in the adoption list, that's also a really good time to start talking about the finances of having a child, right? The cost of having a child numbers just came out. Raising a child from 0 to 18 is over $300,000,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, which is no surprise when we think about, again, the cost of childcare and healthcare and all
Absolutely.
of those things.
Yes.
But it's an expense. It's not just like, oh, we love each other and we want to have a baby. It's also like, can we afford to care for
Truly.
this child in the way that we want to care for it?
Yes.
And not even that, but the cost of going through having a child, I
Mhm.
think, as uncomfortable as it is, having the conversations around how much are we comfortable financially investing into this journey, and what's the limit that we're allowed to have, which is an awful, awkward conversation to
Yes.
say we will put up to $80,000 towards this
Yes.
possibility. And
Yes.
once we hit that number, we will acknowledge that it might not be for us, which is, that's why you have a therapist to unpack all of that.
I have
But it's
literal
much
chills
better
right
than,
now. Yes.
yeah, but it's much better than going through
Yeah.
$80,000, remortgaging a house, taking out lines of credit,
Mhm.
and then having a child on top of that, and then adding on that $300,000
Right.
expense.
Right.
And I know that people are listening to this going, I can't believe you just put a number to the cost of a child.
Uh-huh.
I want for you to understand that there is a cost associated with children. It would be amazing if we lived in a country where we had perinatal, postpartum,
Yeah.
paternity, maternity leave and supports, but we just don't. And so we are funding, especially until a child gets into kindergarten, that's out of our pocket. And we're certainly funding whatever costs come up before a child even makes it here.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. And I do want to validate when a person their stomach might turn thinking of that sort of thing. And again, that's what you talk about. That's why we encourage everyone to have a therapist that you can unpack that sort of thing. And also it is such a consideration because just if you lived in a perfect vacuum of a world where money was no object, which that doesn't exist, but let's say for argument's sake,
Yeah.
the stress of a baby by itself or another human for whom you are completely responsible that is not capable of taking care of itself in whatever regard, be it a newborn or through adoption at an older age, whatever it might be, is stressful enough. And then to compound that with the anxiety that is related to the financial piece and the stressors, it is definitely something that needs to be contemplated before just the romance and the beauty of let's have a baby together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's the other piece when it comes to adult relationships too, right? A lot of us have been sold this idea that love will get us everywhere we need to go. And what research shows, depending on the year, depending on the study, the leading causes of divorce or separation in our country are arguments over money.
Yes.
Right? So if we can have open, honest, vulnerable conversations with our
Yes.
partner about what we want money to look like in our life, what we think we should save for, when we want to retire, if we want to retire, what's a number we are allowed to spend without checking in with our partner. If we can have those types of conversations, what research shows is that couples who talk about money are happier than those that don't. Conversely, couples who fight about money, that's a stronger predictor of separation or divorce.
Uh-huh.
Well, again, having these conversations sounds so scary and sounds so overwhelming, but it's an investment in your intimacy and in your
Mhm.
relationship to talk about money.
Absolutely. I mean, it's literally an investment in your relationship. And I love that you even used the word vulnerable there because it is
Oh my
something
gosh.
that we all continue to struggle to be. I think a lot of
Okay.
us in certain ways and certain
Yeah.
things we're more apt to be. Um and being able to do that, I think that goes back to all the conversations we keep having about communication and relationships, romantically, any interpersonal relationship, in
Mhm.
parenting, talking about things. Even you and I talked about earlier about like speaking our truth about imposter syndrome, right? Like even
Yeah.
just getting things out and being able to be open about it is what helps us to not feel stuck or to feel in some sort of way. And you're right. The studies show it's the financial piece when we argue about money, we're more likely to end up in places that we don't want to necessarily be in our relationships for sure. So I appreciate you sharing that. So, of course, everyone has a very unique journey. Everyone's starting place for finances, everything is so different, of course. But I was just curious if there were any sort of common themes that you've noticed in your time working as a financial therapist that you've seen.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, the two big things that come up in my practice are financial anxiety and money shame.
Yes.
So, financial anxiety is feeling nervous, worried, or on edge when we think about or engage with our finances. And a myth about financial anxiety is if I had more money, I wouldn't have financial anxiety.
Sure.
Yes, it is true that having enough money to have your needs met is associated with decreasing financial anxiety. But
Mhm.
after our needs are met, once we hit that threshold, then anxiety can happen to anyone. So it's not a number in your bank account that then all of a sudden your financial anxiety disappears, right? It's an
Absolutely.
internal work around why do I feel weird when I look at my bank account? Why do I get knots in my stomach when it's time to file taxes, right?
Yes.
And that's a big theme that comes up in my work. And then the other theme is money shame. I'm bad with money. I'll never get money. Money isn't for people like me. And how both financial anxiety and money shame can become this spiral that prevents us from actually engaging with our money in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. Gosh, that makes me think, are you familiar with Dax Shepard? He has a podcast
Yes, yes, of
called
course.
Armchair
He's a
Expert.
fellow Michigander, so of
Oh,
course
that's
I
right.
yes.
That's right. Yes, he is. That's it.
Yes,
That's right.
yes.
So I
Mhm.
really love his podcast, Armchair Experts. And he talks about obviously he's very open, which I love, especially in his recovery, but he talks about his childhood, his youth, um, being financially insecure in a number of ways for a number of years. And he literally mentioned that he was like, as I started to make money and get more jobs, I had a number in my head. He didn't share what the number was. It's not important now, but once I get to this number, I've made it. I'm safe. I'm set. I'm secure. I can be married. I can raise children, on and on and on. And yeah, I thought that was really interesting because he was like absolute the falsity of it all. Just I got to that number. He's if you don't know who Doug Shepard is, he does not being gross about this again. It's not being
Yeah.
tacky, but he's like, I blew past that number and I am still stressed all the time, right? So it
Mhm.
really genuinely, and I don't know what his net worth is, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
but genuinely, even people who have Hollywood money who live with Princess Anna from Frozen still find themselves feeling financial stressors. And some of that is the trauma of his childhood. And also, it's just the reality of the situation where we need to make sure that we're continuing to be intentional about our choices that we make around our finances. And in being open and recognizing, speaking our truth about the financial anxiety, recognizing what sort of money shame that we do possess. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that we see these people who have in our minds or in some of our minds like more than enough, and we go, how could they possibly be worried about money? But it's all relative, right? It's
It's
all relative.
That's
Mhm.
exactly right. It is all relative. And it's just not to be too cliche, but the overarching theme of we don't know what another person's journey has been, even
Yeah.
if it's just the day or their whole journey for the life. So when we recognize them looking at from the outside in, understanding that there's people are much more layered than just whatever they're presenting for sure. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to share this. It really, like I said, I myself in my practice have had conversations with people about the stressors of money and childcare and trips, traveling. I feel like I need to get away for a little bit, but getting away is that requires money or somebody to watch the kids and all of that. So it's very helpful to have a space where you're able to kind of process that through and talk about it intentionally. So I really deeply appreciate you sharing with all of the listeners. I want to wanted you to let them know, where can they find you?
Yeah, great question, Meg. Well, first, I'm so happy to have this conversation. I'm super, super passionate about it for a reason. We all have a money story and a relationship with money. And whether this is a person's first time kind of considering it or their 100th time diving into it, it's so important to have this message out there that we all have a relationship with money, and we all have a responsibility to check in and nurture that relationship. So, in terms of where people can find me, my
Mhm.
business and my practice is called Mind Money Balance. My website's of the same name. My podcast is of the same name. My Instagram handle is of the same name. So, you can find me on any of those places. I have a free quiz on my website that's super fun to help you learn a little bit more about your money archetype. And so,
Mhm.
that can help you understand what are some of your strengths and what are some of your challenges in the way that you view money. It's on my homepage, or you can just go to mindmoneybalance.com/quiz. But yeah, I would love, come say hi, say, hey, I heard you on Meg's podcast, or I saw you on her video podcast. I would love that.
Yeah, that would be so great. Well, I just thank you so much for your time. Everyone go check it out. Take your quiz, find your
Yes.
archetype. I love it. Stay curious, not judgmental, and make it a good one.